know me. Jesus knows you. Do you know Him? Insurmountable odds? Man's dilemma? Maybe. But there's God's ability. And He knows where every one of us resides, who we are, what we think, what we do, where we go, and what makes us tick. He knows us better than we know ourselves, and when we have need within His will, trust in God's ability. He knows your heart, He knows your name, your despair, your fear, and all the rest. He knows it all. God saw, you remember, and He knew at the Red Sea. You remember they'd just come out of Egyptian slavery, and they'd stayed ahead of the Egyptians and just out of sight and finally just out of reach. And when they got to the Red Sea, here came the Egyptians behind them, and they had to stop there because the waters were still up, and how are we going to get across? And now we come out here and they're going to slaughter us and all of that, and they just began to whine and they began to be fearful. God stood behind, between them and the Egyptians, all night as the winds blew, after Moses had held forth his rod. And the next day they marched through on dry ground. And later the Egyptians were drowned in the sea. God's ability. He saw them, and He knew what they needed. Jesus knew. God knew. When Nehemiah was burdened about the fallen walls around Jerusalem that once stood so proudly, and then they had become broken down after they were overrun by the enemy, and they had then were released and able to go back and settle in their homeland, but they had some projects ahead of them. They had these walls to repair, and word got to Nehemiah, and he wept. And he was burdened because of what was going on back there. And so he went and he took a ride quietly at night, and he began to survey all the walls. Don't think for a minute that God didn't see. He knew where he was. And the walls got built as God took care of him and provided. God saw and knew a man who was burdened about the condition around Jerusalem. Well, Jesus knows our need. There's God's ability. I like our text. Notice verses 4 through 7. Back in Mark, the 16th chapter. But when they looked up, they saw that stone. It was large and had been rolled away. They got there and the stone was already taken care of. It was out of the way. God knew what they would need. But of course, that was because of the resurrection. And as they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. In other words, they were afraid. But then he said, "Don't be alarmed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene. He knew what they were there for, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he's going ahead of you into Galilee, and there you will see him, just as he told you. First, don't be alarmed. Then I know who you are looking for, and then this is what happened. Now go and tell, and you will see him just as he told you." You see, God knew their feeling, their despair, their need, and He met them there. There's God's ability. He knows your need too. Man's dilemma, God's ability. There's also an appropriate response. That's verse 8. Do you see it? Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. they were afraid. They ran from the tomb. I'm not so sure that the word afraid captures what's going on there in verse 8. Actually, another way to say that would be they were trembling with fear and they were terrified because of what they saw there at the tomb, with the stone rolled away and the encounters that they had had there, and understanding that God was at work and He was a powerful God. This morning, if you have been to the empty tomb, if you have seen His work, if you've seen His power, you can only tremble as well, be afraid, because of who you recognize God as being and who you are and I am in His very midst. That was really the way it was with Isaiah, isn't it? Back in the book of Isaiah in the Old Testament, we come to chapter 6, and we look at verses 1 through 5, and I want to show you something. It says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of His robe filled the temple. In other words, he saw the Lord. And above Him were seraphs, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, with 2 they were flying, and they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. And at the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. And then I cried, Isaiah says, Woe to me! I am ruined. For I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphs flew to me with a live coal in his hand, with which he had taken with tongs from the altar. And of course he touched his mouth, and Isaiah then was able to speak. But when he saw a vision of God, he was afraid, because of who God is. It's when you and I are afraid because we see Him and who He is, that we come to real faith and trust. When we see who He is and who I am and my need, there's that kind of fear, but it also produces faith and trust. We need to know that today, the same God who moved the stone is alive and well. And He says, trust me. I know what I'm doing. Let's stick in there. I'm with you. Come. Follow me. Do you need to see Him today? Have you ever really looked at Him? Have you really ever fathomed what the empty tomb is all about? Have you read the miracles in the Bible and seen His power and His love and His service and all of that? Really come to grips with who He is. Maybe today we just need to look and see Jesus and see the powerful God that we serve. This morning, if you're here, maybe you need to see for the first time. We're going to sing an invitation hymn this morning, a hymn that really calls each and every one of us to decision. And I want us to see this and sing this morning. And I want us to think in terms of needing to see Jesus and who He really is, as told in Scripture. There's not a better song that we could be singing at this time in our service than number 297, Turn Your Eyes Upon Jesus. Let's see the wonder of power and authority today. Will you stand with me as we sing the first and the last verses?